Alyssa, cancel your wedding. We need you to run the logistics for Brandon's instead. You're finally useful for something. My mother said it casually, like a harmless comment, dropping it between sips of champagne, as if she had just asked for more ice. Across the table, my brother Brandon wore a smug little grin while he adjusted his fake Rolex with the confidence of a man who thinks the world was built to applaud him. My father would not even look at me, not even a glance, as if meeting my eyes would require him to admit I mattered. I did not scream, and I did not cry, because I had already learned that reactions were the fuel my family lived on. I simply picked up my purse, slid the unpaid $400 dinner bill toward my father, and walked out of the restaurant without a word. They assumed my silence meant I was defeated. They did not understand that silence can be strategy, and that night it was the first weapon I chose. Have you ever been told your major life event does not matter as much as a sibling's? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. My name is Alyssa. I am 29, and for most of my life, I was the family's financial safety net disguised as a disappointment, the person they relied on in emergencies while still treating me like I was never enough. It started when I was 16. While other kids were saving for prom tickets, I was handing my father a white envelope every Friday containing exactly $150 from my tips at the diner. They called it contributing to the household. I called it rent because it was not optional and it was never appreciated. That same year, my parents bought Brandon a brand new Mustang for his 18th birthday, like he was some kind of investment they expected to pay off. They did not ask him for gas money. They did not ask him to get a job. They handed him the keys and told him he was destined for greatness, like greatness was something you could buy and wrap in a bow. I remember watching him drive away, the engine roaring, while I calculated if I had enough leftover cash to buy a used textbook for my advanced placement history class. I cried about it then. I felt small and used, like my effort existed only to support the story they wanted to tell about him. But looking back now from the driver's seat of my own life, I realized that envelope of cash was the best education they ever gave me. It taught me the value of a dollar. And more importantly, it taught me that their love had a price tag I could never afford, because even when I paid, the product was always rejection. But nothing prepared me for the financial suicide mission they launched for this wedding. A few days after the dinner at the Azure, I sat in my home office, a space I bought and paid for without their help, and pulled up the public property records on my parents' house. I needed to understand where the money was coming from. My father had been complaining about the cost of heating oil all winter, yet they were throwing a six-figure event with champagne towers, luxury vendors, and a guest list designed to impress strangers. The math did not add up. One click, and the truth flashed on the screen. It was not savings, it was a massacre, the kind that looks polite on paper, but leaves nothing standing afterward. To fund the $150,000 non-refundable deposit for Brandon's royal wedding, my parents had not just scraped together some extra cash. They had executed a cash-out refinance on their paid-off home, stripping out 80% of the equity they had spent 30 years building, turning decades of work into a single reckless weekend. But that was not enough. I dug deeper into the tax implications because numbers always tell the truth, even when people do not. To cover the rest, they had liquidated their 401k retirement accounts early. They took the 10% penalty. They took the massive income tax hit. They literally set their entire financial future on fire just to keep Brandon warm for one weekend, sacrificing stability for appearances and calling it love. I stared at the numbers, feeling a cold kind of nausea that was not fear but recognition. Why would rational adults do this? It's what I call the borrower's delusion. See, my parents did not just love Brandon. They were addicted to the idea of him. And addiction makes people do irrational things while insisting they are in control. They had bet every cent of their retirement on the fantasy that Brandon was a genius business executive who would become a millionaire and take care of them. They needed him to be the golden child. If Brandon was a success, then their recklessness was actually a brilliant investment. If Brandon was a fraud, then they were just two elderly people who had bankrupted themselves for an ego trip, and they could not handle that truth. That's why they hated me. I was stable. I was debt-free. I was boring. I was the mirror that reflected their own stupidity back at them. Every time I paid a bill on time or saved money, it reminded them that they did not have to gamble everything to be secure. They had to smash the mirror to keep believing the lie, because admitting the truth would mean admitting they chose wrong for years. They thought they were investing in a king. They did not know they were bankrolling a court jester who was already stealing from the treasury, smiling while he drained everyone around him. The escalation began 3 weeks before the wedding, and it was not subtle. It started with a text from Brandon at 2 in the morning. Need you to coordinate with the caterer. They're asking about vegan options. Handle it. No, please. No. Hello. Just a command. Like I was his personal assistant instead of his sister. I did not reply because I refused to feed that dynamic anymore. The next morning, my phone rang while I was in a meeting with a client. It was my mother. I sent it to voicemail. She called again and again, 17 times in 20 minutes, weaponizing persistence like it was love. Finally, I stepped out into the hallway and answered. What is the emergency? I asked, my heart pounding because years of conditioning still made me expect punishment. Why aren't you answering your brother? She shrieked. He's stressed out of his mind. He needs you to manage the vendor contracts. You know he's not good with details. I have a job, Mom, I said, keeping my voice low. And I have my own wedding to plan. Remember the one you told me to cancel? Don't be selfish, Alyssa, she snapped. Brandon is the heir apparent to the Sterling Empire. This wedding is a networking event for his future. Yours is just a ceremony. Prioritize the family. I'm not doing it, I said, and hung up, because boundaries mean nothing if you do not enforce them. That afternoon, they showed up at my apartment, all three of them, like a coordinated unit. I opened the door to find Brandon standing there in a suit that cost more than my car, flanked by my parents like bodyguards. He pushed past me into the living room without waiting for an invite, acting like ownership was his default setting. Where's Julian? He asked, looking around with a sneer. Out fixing a toilet somewhere. Julian is working, I said, leaving the door open. What do you want? We need to talk about your attitude, my father said, stepping inside. Your brother is under immense pressure. The least you can do is help him coordinate. I told you no, I said. I'm busy. Brandon laughed, and the sound was pure contempt. He walked over to my desk and picked up a framed photo of Julian and me. Busy doing what? Crunching numbers for chump change. Look, Alyssa, let's be real. Julian is a handyman. You're a glorified accountant. Neither of you understands the stakes here. He set the photo down face down, like my life was something to dismiss and cover up. I'm going to be vice president of sales by Christmas, he announced, puffing out his chest. Mr. Sterling himself is coming to the wedding. This event has to be flawless. If I land this promotion, I'll be making enough to buy and sell you 10 times over. I looked at him, really looked at him, at the arrogance, the entitlement, the absolute certainty that the world existed to serve him. You really think you're getting that promotion? I asked quietly. It's a done deal. He scoffed. Sterling loves me. I'm the golden boy. That's why Mom and Dad put up the money. It's an investment in the winning horse. My mother nodded eagerly. Exactly. We're investing in the future, and you need to get on board, Alyssa. Stop being jealous and start being useful. Jealous, I repeated, because the accusation was so absurd it almost felt scripted. Yes, jealous, Brandon shouted, because I'm the one going places. I'm the one who matters, and you're just the help. So act like it. He smirked at me. That same smirk he had used since we were kids, when he broke my toys and blamed me for crying. The smirk of someone who enjoys harm because it proves power. Fine, I said. The word tasted like ash, but it was necessary, because sometimes you say yes to get closer to the truth. I'll be there. Good, my father said, patting Brandon on the back. See, she just needed a reminder of her place. They left, high-fiving each other in the hallway. celebrating like they had conquered me. They thought they had won. They thought they had crushed me back into submission. I closed the door and locked it. Then I turned around and looked at the empty apartment, feeling something sharper than anger settle in. They did not know that Julian was not fixing a toilet. He was in a boardroom across town, signing the final acquisition papers for a chain of luxury venues, including the Gilded Manor, the very place Brandon had just booked, and they certainly did not know about my job, glorified accountant. Brandon had called me. I walked to my desk and opened my laptop. I logged into the secure portal for the Sterling Group. I typed in my credentials: User A, Vance, clearance level, external forensic auditor. Status: active. I was not an accountant. I was the person hired by the board of directors to find the leak in their sales division. I was the person Brandon was terrified of only, the person who ends careers with evidence, and he did not even know I existed. I stared at the screen. They wanted me to be useful. I would be useful. I would be the most useful person in their entire lives. I was going to audit my brother's entire existence. The next morning, I did not put on my usual work-from-home leggings. I put on a charcoal blazer, stilettos that clicked like gunshots on marble, and the diamond stud earrings I'd bought myself after my last big case, because presentation matters when you are walking into a place built on image. I drove downtown to the Sterling Group Tower, a 40-story monolith of glass and steel that dominated the skyline. To my family, this building was the temple where Brandon worshipped. To Brandon, it was the kingdom he was about to inherit. To me, it was a crime scene. I walked into the lobby. The security guard, a former Marine named Earl, who never smiled at anyone, looked up. He saw me, straightened his spine, and nodded. "Good morning, Miss Vance," he rumbled. "Bard Room B is unlocked for you. Thanks, Earl." I swiped my badge. It was not a visitor pass. It was a red-level clearance card, the kind issued only to suite executives and the external auditors hired to police them. The light turned green, and I stepped into the elevator. I was not here to check attendance. I was here to hunt. I set up in the private conference room on the 38th floor. I did not need to hack anything. I had root access. I pulled up the financial records for the sales division, specifically the accounts managed by the top performer, Brandon Vance, glorified accountant. He had called me. I opened the digital ledger. I did not look for math errors. Math errors are mistakes. I was looking for patterns, and patterns tell stories. It took me less than 10 minutes to find the ghost in the machine. Brandon's sales figures were spectacular, too spectacular. He was showing a 30% quarter-over-quarter growth in a stagnant market, the kind of number that looks impressive until you test it. I clicked on his top 3 new clients: Apex Global Solutions, Vertex Media, and North Star Consulting. I ran a quick cross-reference with the Secretary of State's database. Apex Global, dissolved in 2019. Vertex Media, the registered address was a UPS store mailbox in a strip mall in Nevada. North Star Consulting did not exist. My brother was not a sales genius. He was a fiction writer. He was creating fake invoices to inflate his sales targets, triggering massive performance bonuses for himself. But where was the money coming from to pay these invoices? I followed the cash flow. He was funneling the marketing budget, money meant for ads and client dinners, into vendor payments to these fake companies. And here was the kicker. I traced the routing number for Vertex Media. It looked familiar. I pulled up my own banking app and checked my transfer history, specifically the $2,000 I had sent Brandon for his car repair last year. The routing numbers matched. He was wiring company money directly into his personal PayPal account. He was not just cooking the books. He was burning down the kitchen. The total embezzled amount over 3 years was just over $400,000. I sat back in my chair, feeling a cold, hard knot in my stomach. This was not just unethical. This was federal prison time. This was wire fraud, tax evasion, and grand larceny. Then I found the cherry on top, a draft email in his sent folder addressed to his frat brother. "The old man Sterling is going senile. I'm printing money over here and nobody's watching. By the time I'm VP, I'll bury the paper trail. The parents just mortgaged the house for the wedding, so I'm golden." I stared at the screen. He called our parents' sacrifice, their financial ruin, his safety net. He was laughing at them. He was laughing at Mr. Sterling, and he was laughing at the system, convinced it could never touch him. I hit print. The laser printer hummed to life in the corner, spitting out page after page of damning evidence. Bank statements, fake invoices, the email, the IP logs, and the timelines that tied it all together. It was a thick stack, warm to the touch. It weighed about as much as a brick, and it would do just as much damage when it hit him. I organized the papers neatly, tapping the edges on the mahogany table to straighten them. Then I placed the entire stack into a thick cream-colored envelope. On the front, in my best calligraphy, I wrote 2 words, wedding gift. The day of the wedding was a spectacle of excess. I arrived at the Gilded Manor in a black tie gown I'd bought specifically for this moment. Midnight blue, sleek, and devastatingly elegant. Julian looked like James Bond in his tuxedo. We did not look like the help. We looked like we owned the place, which technically Julian did. We walked through the iron gates, past the fountains spouting champagne, and into the grand ballroom. It was breathtaking. Crystal chandeliers the size of small cars hung from the ceiling. Waiters in white gloves circulated with trays of caviar. It was a palace built on a foundation of lies, funded by my parents' fear and my brother fraud. Brandon was holding court near the bar, already 3 drinks deep, laughing too loudly like confidence could drown out consequences. He spotted us immediately. "Well, well," he sneered, walking over with a glass of scotch in his hand. "Look who decided to play dress up. Did you rent those or did you steal them?" "We bought them," I said, my voice cool. "Nice party, Brandon." "It's not a party," he corrected, leaning in close so I could smell the expensive alcohol on his breath. "It's a coronation. Mr. Sterling is here. He's going to announce my promotion tonight, and you know what the best part is." He gestured around the room, soaking in the attention like it was oxygen. Brandon bragged that our parents had funded everything because they knew who the real winner was. Nearby, Mom and Dad beamed as they praised his visionary leadership, clinging to the illusion that he was Sterling's chosen heir. They had no idea they were standing on a trap door. Then Mr. Sterling entered the room. The room hushed as the legendary businessman moved through the crowd. Brandon rushed to greet him, boasting about excellence and destiny, performing like a man desperate to be crowned. Sterling listened calmly, then stepped onto the stage and took the microphone. "I'd like to correct the record," he said. "Accuracy matters in business. Please welcome my lead external auditor, Alyssa Vance." The spotlight hit me. Gasps followed. My parents froze. Brandon went pale. Sterling announced the truth. $400,000 in embezzlement. 3 years of tax fraud and a crude shell company scheme. Brandon was not being promoted. He was fired. Federal agents were waiting. Brandon collapsed as he was arrested. My mother screamed that I was lying. Sterling replied simply, "It's math." Outside, Brandon snapped when he saw Julian, lunging at him in a panic. Officers tackled him instantly. Assault was added to his charges. My parents then demanded their $150,000 wedding deposit back. Julian said nothing. I stepped forward and cited the contract's conduct clause. Criminal activity voided all refunds. That money, their retirement, their last gamble, now legally belonged to Julian. Brandon is serving 3 years. My parents lost their house soon after. Julian later bought it at auction and turned it into a shelter for runaway teens. They tried to make me feel homeless my whole life. Now I hold the keys and the doors finally open to people who deserve safety, respect, and a real chance. My golden boy brother deliberately set his wedding on the same day as mine, so I made him regret.